They look prehistoric, can weigh up to 200 pounds, and spend most of their time in deep water. Coming up on this episode of the Paw Report, we learn more about a species found in Illinois, but listed as endangered by state officials. Stay with us.
Finding a solution for your pet's behavior problem can be confusing. Dr. Sally J. Foote helps you help your pet. Private consultation and resources are available at drsallyjfoote.com. Foote and Friends, better bond, better behavior.
Fetcher's Pet Supply on the north side of the Charleston Square, serving the EIU community since 1991. Fetcher's welcomes all pets on a leash, is open 7 days a week, and offers made in the USA food. Pet supplies for dogs, cats, reptiles, and fish. Fetcher's Pet Supply in Charleston.
The Paw Report on WEIU is supported by Rural King, America's farm and home store, livestock feed, farm equipment, pet supplies, and more. You can find your store and more information regarding Rural King at ruralking.com.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.
Gnarly, scary, big, prehistoric, all adjectives to describe the subject of our Paw Report segment today. And we are joined by Dr. Ethan Kessler, who is, a U of I researcher. Your resume is quite long, and so we'll start with that. Well, first introduction is thank you for being a part of the Paw Report.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we're going to talk about something very unique today that we've never done on the Paw Report, is alligator snapping turtles. We've talked about turtles before, but never this creature. So thank you for joining us to talk about that. Tell us about you. You just finished your doctoral work, and so who is Ethan Kessler?
Well, I'm a herpetologist is the term. I study reptiles and amphibians. The alligator snapping turtle was the project that I've spent the last 6 or 7 years on for my graduate work, and it's still ongoing. Mm-hmm. That's been the bulk of my work, but I work with a variety of reptiles and amphibians.
So as I mentioned, today we are talking about the alligator snapping turtle, very gnarly looking creature, a creature that's not plentiful in the state of Illinois. Sure. But what is really the difference between the alligator snapping turtle versus the snapping turtle that we've probably all seen crossing the road or near ponds and lakes? Right,
yeah. The common snapping turtle is the species that we get here, and they range from Canada down into even northern South America. So they're one of the most wide-ranging turtles that are out there. They are obviously different in size. The alligator snapping turtle is the largest freshwater turtle in North America. They differ in the habitats that they can live in. Alligator snapping turtles are mostly riverine turtles, but they can live in oxbows and sloughs down in Louisiana. You kind of think of swampy areas when you think of alligator snapping turtles. But physically, they have a few differences as well that may, to the untrained eye you might only be able to see when they're next to each other. But the alligator snapping turtle, I think the biggest thing that people see are the big keels that run along the back. They have 3 rows of ridges along the back of their shell. I've had people tell me they look like Bowser from Mario. And those really separate them apart. The common snapping turtles will kind of have those, but they're not as pronounced as they are in the alligator snapping turtle. I think another kind of neat one is they have these little fleshy projections around their eyes that people refer to as eyelashes. And the common snapping turtle doesn't have that. So if you're lucky or unlucky enough to get close enough to see those eyelashes, that's a good way to tell them apart. Mm-hmm. But generally, if you see, especially in central Illinois, if you see a big turtle that looks like a snapping turtle, it's almost 100% of the time going to be a common snapping turtle.
Other things about the turtle the alligator snapping turtle that I found interesting, the tail has a certain formation, and they really don't spend a lot of time outside of water.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, they're almost fully aquatic. Really only come out onto land when the females are laying eggs, and that's going to be an overnight trip. As part of my work, I was radio tracking turtles, so that allows us to pinpoint turtles. And we had hundreds of turtles, thousands of locations that we got, and I think only 3 or 4 of those locations were live turtles on land. And so it's a very small proportion of the time that they're spending on land. So again, another way, if you see a big snapping turtle on land, it's probably a common snapping turtle.
Where did the species originate from? Or I guess if we could go back in time a little bit, what is their history? Because really up until 1984, and we're going to talk about that after, there just wasn't a lot of alligator snapping turtles even in this state.
Sure. So back through deep time, I mean, there's records from Nebraska 10,000 years ago, but more recently they're really confined to they're actually only found in the United States. So they're an all-American turtle. They're on top of that, they're only found in rivers that flow into the Gulf of Mexico. So they're found from East Texas to the Panhandle of Florida. And they're a lot more common in the deeper South, especially along the Gulf Coast. But they do range up the Mississippi River into Illinois, out to Oklahoma and Kansas. They've suffered a lot from a variety of different sources, both indirect and direct. I mean, channelization of the rivers, removal of the log jams that they need for their habitat, damming rivers. Those have all impacted this turtle, draining of wetlands, things like that. But they were also really heavily harvested. So there was a really big trapping practice, especially in the early 1900s, kind of going into the 70s and 80s. And they were trapping hundreds of pounds of these turtles, tons of these turtles out of rivers every year for the meat trade. And so that had large impacts, even in the heart of their range in Arkansas, Louisiana, Georgia, that really impacted them directly, where you're actually removing adult turtles from the population and almost extirpated them from a lot of rivers.
You know, I failed to ask this. I should have probably said this first, and our viewers may be wondering, is there any correlation between the alligator? I mean, was there some weird breeding that happened somewhere in the food chain that gave them that name, or is it more just the actual look when you compare the two species?
Yeah, there's no hybridization or that would be huge news if we found that out. No, they're just as fearsome and as looking as the alligator, and have the same kinds of ridges as we know on the alligator. The tails look very similar.
Right. So, is the alligator snapping turtle considered an endangered species in Illinois? I know there's not many of them, at least when you look at time and the history books. Is it still considered endangered here in the state? Yeah,
it's officially listed as endangered in Illinois, and it receives some protection throughout the entire range. Right now, it's currently under investigation for whether it should be listed under the Endangered Species Act at the federal level, so receive full federal protection across the entire range. And we'll find that out in the next couple of years, how they decide on that.
So even in the state of Illinois, I'm assuming that all the reasons you listed previously also probably filtered into Illinois as to why the population dwindled, habitat, that sort of thing. Right,
yeah. I mean, the trapping may be a little less impactful. In Illinois, there just wasn't an industry built upon it. But yeah, Illinois, we're a crop state. We use our rivers to get water off of the land, and so there's a lot of channelization, there's a lot of damming that happens in the state, and that kind of while it provides great value to us, it doesn't provide great habitat for some of our native species. So it's kind of a benefit, cost benefit that you need to weigh.
Right. Let's talk specifically about the population currently of this alligator snapping turtle in Illinois. And while you're answering that question, eventually I want you to get to 2014 because that was a big find that made national news. So first population, how many wild
Right.
alligator snapping turtles, and we'll define the difference, would you say are currently in Illinois, and then kind of take us through time up to 1984 and then between 1984 and 2014, and our viewers will understand when you give us the story.
Right, yeah. So currently right now, as far as wild alligator snapping turtles that haven't been, we haven't messed with at all, we really only know about the one. And the history, if I can step back a little bit, the last 150 years in Illinois, we only know of about 17 total turtles that have been found in Illinois. So that's not a lot of turtles.
No.
But we do know that only 2 of them have been found in the last 50 years. So that gives us some insight that there has been some kind of a decline in that last 150 years, with limited data, obviously. But yeah, in 1984, there was one, it was the first one that had been found in 20 or 30 years. It was found at what ended up being our study site in southern Illinois. It was just found by a fisherman who contacted a local biologist. And so since that was the last location, when we started a reintroduction, which is what my research was on, monitoring that reintroduction, I can talk about that a little bit later. During that work, we actually found a wild turtle in 2014, and this was a huge shock to us because we had trapped at that site before. We had no indication that there were wild turtles, and we actually hand captured that turtle. So as part of our reintroduction monitoring, we recapture our turtles twice a year, and it can be kind of dodgy at times anyways because we're diving into this mucky water, feeling around, for these turtles. Came up with a turtle that was 3 times bigger than the turtle that we thought we were going after, and didn't have any of our markings or anything. It had to be a wild turtle. It wasn't one of our turtles. And it was just a total shock that we came upon this animal. And there was some choice words that were thrown around on the side.
I bet.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And the thing is, when I was reading a little bit about the turtles, the wild turtle that you found in 2014, I guess the easiest way to say it is it really didn't have any friends, but they can still survive until their death.
Right.
Being on their own, correct?
Yeah, and that's kind of the tricky thing with turtles is that they're so long-lived, and they can put up with so much abuse in their life. They're these really tough animals, so they can live for 80 years without any kind of a viable population around them. That we have these, what some people might call a zombie population, where it looks like we have turtles there, but either there's not enough for reproduction or they can't successfully nest, say raccoons or other animals that dig up nests and they can't reproduce. It looks like we have turtles there, but we're not going to have turtles there in 50, 100 years because there's no new turtles coming into the population.
I'm assuming that they probably don't have a lot, if any, predators. Now they would if they were just hatched or the eggs, but I'm assuming that once they start to grow, other things kind of leave these guys alone.
Yeah, they're kind of big tanks. I mean, they have really high mortality rates when they're younger. But once they reach a certain size, there's really nothing that can get at them. And if you think about, the kinds of animals that share habitat with them, I think otters are probably the last one that can get the bigger turtles. But once they reach a certain size, it's really only other alligator snapping turtles that can eat them.
Mm-hmm. How long have you been, you mentioned it in the beginning, but overall, how long have you been monitoring, studying these creatures? And I guess I want to know what the monitoring means. Like when you monitor them, it's a process. I mean, you're going to sites, you're working in labs, you're studying DNA. I want to know all of that.
Right. So there's a couple arms of the work that I do. The main one is the reintroduction, and that consists of sourcing turtles that have been raised in captivity. We fit them with these things called radio transmitters, which are these little devices that can send out a radio signal that's on a very specific wavelength for that turtle. And so we can go to that radio station, essentially. It's essentially a radio station for that individual, and it sends out a beep. And so we can use a directional antenna to figure out where that beep is coming from. And that's how we monitor the turtles that have been released. And so that's how we try to recapture them, because we can pinpoint them to a certain space. And so that monitoring happens through radio telemetry, where we go out, we track the turtles, see where they're moving, recapture them, weigh them, measure them, do health exams, make sure that they're alive, obviously, when we have them in our hands. And that forms the bulk of that work, just seeing how the population is working, seeing what our survival rates are, our growth. Those are very important aspects of reintroductions. But we're doing surveys in other ways as well. You know, trapping is obviously something that we like to do. For turtles, it's the way that we've always monitored turtles. But we have a new technique called environmental DNA that we use to monitor these turtles as well. And a little bit more about environmental DNA, or eDNA as it's called. We can get a sample from the environment, process it in the lab, and see if the DNA of our target species is in that sample, because animals are constantly shedding skin cells and other things that have DNA in them. And so it's kind of a way that we can infer the presence of our species at the site without actually having them in hand.
And these are soil samples, water samples?
Yeah. I mean, there's even people that use snow, paw prints in the snow, and see what animal made that paw print. It's really taking off. It's about a little over 10 years old, the actual technique, but it's just exploding right now.
So when you say you're monitoring and tracking these animals, you're putting on your waders and you're going to these waterways.
Yeah.
A lot of them are in southern Illinois, from what I understand.
Right.
Do you have any sort of like fear factor? I mean, these creatures are big, and they're strong, and I think I would have a fear that I would step on one and get the clamp on.
Yeah. I mean, luckily, most of the time when we're tracking, we're in kayaks, and so the only thing we have to worry about is tipping over. We're not actually walking on them. But when we do our recapture events every year, we're in wetsuits and we're actually reaching down and feeling around for them. And the worst part about it is that we know that they're there. We know that the animal's there. So it's And it's not clear waters that we're diving in. We can't see a thing. You can't see your hand right here in front of your face. So it can be kind of tricky. And we're feeling around. Luckily, their shells have those ridges, so you kind of know when you have them. But I'd say, a lot of times we end up grabbing them by the head.
Oh my!
Yeah. So
wow.
Luckily, they're relatively nice to us. One of my colleagues has been bitten a couple times in the hand, but luckily I've never been bitten, and we have hundreds and hundreds of those recaptures.
And you graciously provided us with some video that not only you but another colleague also you were able to capture, and we're going to show that during this episode. Good. But like you said, it's not like water in the Virgin Islands or Bahamas that's crystal clear. It's murky, muddy, mucky. And when they're in the water, do they bury themselves in the mud, or they're not fully submerged in the mud, because obviously you said that you feel around on the bottom to get to them. Right.
So a lot of times just their head will be sticking out, and it's a really silty stream that we work in, and so they just kind of shimmy around and get into the silt and the log jams and the sticks and everything, and we just have to feel around for them. But even if the water was clear, we'd have a hard time seeing them because they're so well camouflaged in that water, and just in general. Yeah.
In your humble opinion, why is it important to keep this research going and research alive for this particular species?
Yeah, so this project in general, long-term monitoring of a turtle reintroduction in general, it doesn't happen very often. A lot of times projects will get abandoned after a few years. So just having the long-term data is extremely important as scientists, and it sounds kind of boring when you're not when you're not doing this work, but it's really important to see how these work over time. We're working on a decade scale when we work with turtles. A lot of the animals that we release are going to outlive us as researchers, and so understanding how these projects function over a long period of time is important. But the alligator snapping turtle in particular it's a really unique animal in the rivers of America. They are they get to be enormous sizes. They can be, most of them are over 100 pounds when they're fully grown, the adult males. But some of them, they can get up to 200 pounds. They're really big animals. And since they're so big, they kind of have free reign around the rivers. They eat just about everything, so they fulfill a lot of different niches in
carnivores?
those rivers. They literally eat everything. I mean, they will eat fish directly. They have some people may be familiar with their tongue, which has been transformed into a worm.
It's like a lure.
Yeah, exactly. We call it a worm lure. And they open up their mouth, and another adaptation that they have is their mouth is brown on the inside, whereas most turtles have a pink or white mouth. So you can't even see that their mouth is open. You just see this little worm dancing, or a fish does, hopefully. So yeah, they catch fish with luring. They're scavengers. They'll eat anything that's dead in the water. They eat a lot of crayfish. They eat other turtles. Other turtles make up a big proportion of their diet, but they actually eat a lot of plants too. Some stomach content studies show over half of the stomach contents are acorns and tupelo nuts and other seeds from trees that live in the environment. So they have a really varied diet, and that's important because they fulfill a lot of different roles in that ecosystem.
Another big part of your work, and you mentioned it, is the reintroduction of the species to the lands.
Yeah.
How does that work? I mean, are you working with zoos? Are you working with other labs? Or how are you gathering the non-wild alligator snapping turtle,
right,
and putting them back?
Yeah, and so all of the above as far as who's involved. These projects are huge undertakings, and so we need a lot of partners. We partnered up with the Peoria Zoo, who was gracious enough to rear and raise animals that were from captivity. A lot of them were confiscations from people who weren't legally allowed to have animals, and so we were able to use those animals to bolster those wild populations, which is fantastic. A lot of times we need to find owners for those, and not a lot of people. I mean, there are people that want alligator snapping turtles. There's not a lot of people that can provide adequate housing
Right.
for a 100-pound turtle.
Right.
But our major partner that we have is a fish hatchery in Oklahoma that raises these turtles for us. They breed them on site, raise them up to a specific age, and then we can release them. And when this project first started, we had partners in Oklahoma and Louisiana who were also doing reintroductions, so we can figure out how these projects kind of work in different parts of the range of the animal and gain some insights, compare the growth between our population compared to Louisiana and Oklahoma, things like that, figure out how well it's working for us.
We're recording in August.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate any more monitoring, survey work the rest of the year? Will you be returning to these places, or other researchers, will they be returning to these places to once again track? You said it's about twice a year or once a year that you go out and just see growth and see patterns and see movement and see if they survive?
Right, yeah. So this is 2020, so we're dealing with a lot of interesting aspects of this
absolutely.
Year. So it's cut down a lot on the work that we can do. However, we're continuing a release this year. We'll be doing that in the next month. And see how things go. We'll try to be doing a recapture this year in the fall or in the spring, depending on how things go. We have at least another this year and next year of releases. So we have at least 2 more releases slated. That was part of the original plan. And monitoring will probably continue for this population, so that we can gain more information on how the reintroduction goes, to see if we should scale up and do other water bodies in southern Illinois as well.
How many do you believe you're monitoring currently?
Yeah.
We mentioned that this is an endangered species, but the more that you put into a monitoring system, does the population grow? I mean, at what stage does it have to be at before it's kicked out of the endangered column?
Right. And so that's a decision that happens way above my head, and it's generally it's unlikely that it'll happen with one stable population in the state. If we have one good population, that's great, but it's not really sufficient to delist them. For this population, what we essentially have right now, as far as without any further evidence. We have like a little garden, a turtle garden that we're populating. Now, that's not our long-term hope. Our long-term hope is that these turtles grow into adults, they reproduce on their own, and we have a self-sustaining population. That's the ultimate goal of every reintroduction program. Otherwise, we just have a zoo out in the wild,
right.
essentially. So that's the ultimate hope, and that's what the monitoring is going towards. You know, we're hoping to figure out, are our survival rates good enough for this species? Are our growth rates good enough for this species to continue? And our future work is going to be tracking adult females to see if they're nesting, and if they do, are the nests successful? So.
Very interesting. Well, Dr. Ethan Kessler, thank you so much for spending a few moments with the Paw Report to promote the alligator snapping turtle. Probably not a pet, like you said, that people are going to have in their homes, but nonetheless a very interesting creature that we hope continues to live and thrive in the state of Illinois.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you, our viewers of the Paw Report, for joining us for this episode. I'm your host, Kelly Goodwin, and we'll see you next time.
Dave's Decorating Center is a proud supporter of the Paw Report on WEIU. Dave's Decorating Center features the Mohawk Smart Strand Silk Forever Clean Carpet. Dave's Decorating Center, authorized Mohawk Color Center in Charleston.
The Paw Report on WEIU is supported by Rural King, America's farm and home store, livestock feed, farm equipment, pet supplies, and more. You can find your store and more information regarding Rural King at ruralking.com.
Fetcher's Pet Supply on the north side of the Charleston Square, serving the EIU community since 1991. Fetcher's welcomes all pets on a leash, is open 7 days a week, and offers made in the USA food. Pet supplies for dogs, cats, reptiles, and fish. Fetcher's Pet Supply in Charleston.
Finding a solution for your pet's behavior problem can be confusing. Dr. Sally J. Foote helps you help your pet. Private consultation and resources are available at drsallyjfoote.com. Foote and Friends, better bond, better behavior.